Good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be looking at the UK's coal mining history and the Con29M. My name is Bronwyn Townsend and I'm the Marketing Manager here at InfoTrack. Today I'm joined by Andrew Crawshaw from Groundsure, who will take you through the risks associated with coal and the importance of the Con29M report in conveyancing. Before we begin today's webinar, which we expect to take no longer than 40 minutes, I'd like to draw your attention to the Q&A feature on the webinar software. This will allow you to ask questions as we go through, type them in here, and we'll answer any questions that you have at the end of the session. I'm now going to hand over to Andy to present.
That's great, thanks Bron. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining us today. And as Bron said, we'll have a look at the Con29M, how it came about, look at the questions that it involves, and also have a little bit of a snippet on each of those questions and try and help you understand exactly why we ask, or why they're asked, and why it's important that we answer them to do with residential property transactions. And for those of you that may not be aware, here at Groundsure we acquired Mining Searches UK in January this year. And now together we're a leading authority on environmental and geospatial intelligence. We focus on natural and man-made hazards, and we're in a very unique position by being the only environmental and mining search provider on the market. If you aren't familiar with Mining Searches UK, they have over 40 years of experience in coal and non-coal investigation and surveying. They're also one of the only mining search providers who can actually provide a full suite of follow-on services as well. So just to set the scene, the history of coal mining in the UK has resulted in a potential risk of coal mining related ground subsidence in affected areas. There are approximately 500 subsidence claims and 600 surface hazards reported each year, with mining legacy liabilities costing approximately £2.8 billion. As you can see on your screen, 11% of the UK is occupied by the coalfield, which contains some 7 million properties. Within those 7 million properties, 130,000 are situated within 20 metres of a mine entry. As you'll no doubt be aware that in the year 2000, the Law Society produced the Con29M form to assist solicitors in identifying issues relating to coal mining. Law Society guidance states a Con29M report is a mandatory requirement for property and land purchased in coal mining areas. These days, the Coal Authority owns most unworked coal and former mines in Great Britain. Part of their public task is to, of course, deal with historic liability issues and claims relating to subsidence damage. Prior to 2018, the only official Con29M was produced by the Coal Authority, and they remain the authority today. So therefore, all Con29Ms must use their data. However, their data is now licensed out into the marketplace to allow some competition. Official searchers have to be approved by the Law Society and have a royalty levied for use of their logo and the Con29M name. And including the Coal Authority, there are currently only a handful of providers of official searchers on the market, of which we are one of them. So what you're going to hear about today will provide you with an overview of where coal deposits lie in the UK, the types of coal, and an explanation of the different types of mining and extraction techniques that have been used. This understanding feeds into how we consider the risks posed by mining hazards in the context of the Con29M questions. I will talk to you about the story of the mine plans, which constitute the mining archive information and which form the basis of the licensed digitised coal mining data, and get an understanding of the limitations of the data. We'll have a look at the timeline of history of coal in the UK, picking out some significant snippets in time to the present day, as well as a peek into the future. This will then lead us on to the history of coal mining searches themselves, the evolution from paper to digital, where to find guidance, and to consider some of the aspects of the Con29M questions, such as mine entries, recorded workings, possible workings, and coal mining related subsidence. But the story starts some 360 million years ago, or in the Carboniferous period, when dead plant matter in the form of wetlands, sometimes referred to as coal forests, decays and forms a layer. Layers form on top of each other. Geological processes of compaction, deep burial and heat, followed by uplift, erosion and deposition, has left us with layers of coal which we refer to as seams. These seams can be interbedded with other rocks such as limestone, These can then be worked together, like in the Midlands. The coal seams vary in thickness from a few centimetres to many metres, and they can be faulted and folded and near flat to actually steeply dipping. The UK has identified hard coal resources of 910 million tonnes. There are 33 million tonnes of economically recoverable reserves available at operational and permitted mines, plus a further 344 million tonnes at mines in planning. There are also about 1,000 million tonnes of lignite resources, mainly in Northern Ireland, although we don't actually mine lignite. Our reserves lie in some places known well for their coal mining heritage. Throughout the Midlands and southern Wales, coal mining heritage runs deep, and for many, it was the lifeline of their community. There's a 10-metre thick coal seam outcrop in the Midlands, and is considered to be one of the possible origins of the area to be called the Black Country. Scotland holds a large percentage of coal reserves, as well as places in the northeast of England, like Durham. Geaver, a former metal mine, they bought a coal mine in Durham, and we'll hear about that story a bit later on. Cumbria, interestingly, there are plans to work deposits there once more. And in Devon, down in the southwest of the country, we can find Bideford Black. This was extracted and was a poor quality coal used in cosmetics and pigments. These deposits, when mixed with oil, were also used for the hulls of ships in the Royal Navy. Now, to consider the risks posed from the legacy of coal, it is important to have a clear understanding as to the types of mining and extraction methods that have been carried out. This will provide the assessor with key information on the size, the extent, and the depth of the workings, and an appreciation of the techniques available to the miners over time. It is therefore worthwhile to briefly explain some of the types of mining that have been carried out. And an early method of coal extraction is known as drift mining, where coal deposits become exposed within a hillside or a valley. These would be extracted by hand into the hillside until the coal was depleted. The working became unstable and collapsed, or the mine became unworkable. Bell pit mining is another early form of coal mining that works deposits found close to the surface. This involves the sinking of a narrow shaft to access the deposit before working the coal out by hand, leaving a bell-shaped excavation beneath the surface. The coal was then winched to the surface via a bucket, much like a well. These are highly unstable workings. So as a pit became unstable, the miners would return to the surface, sink another shaft adjacent to the previous one in a hope to come down on coal again. Examples of this type of mining can be found in Yorkshire and the Forest of Dean. These workings lie largely unrecorded, except on old paper geological mapping and aerial imagery and LiDAR. In these instances, clusters of these shafts can be identified. Open cast mining, sometimes referred to as open pit or open cut mining, is when coal seams are found in commercially favourable quantities near the surface. The removal of a thin layer of overburden exposes the economically viable coal without the need for tunnelling deep underground. These are very often seen today as huge surface excavations cut down into the ground via a series of benches. Strip mining exposes coal by removing earth or overburden over each seam. The earth above the seam is placed to one side and the coal is then removed. A second strip is then excavated, with the overburden being placed into the first strip for excavation. The coal seam is then followed as a series of adjacent strips. Contour mining. The contour mining method consists of removing overburden from the seam in a pattern following the contours along a ridge or around the hillside. Deep mining, which is often interpreted as mining for coal or mineral deposits from 5,000 feet or 1.5 kilometre down. However, for the purposes of the Con29M report, there is a rule of thumb where it is considered that workings in excess of 150 metres would be considered deep. And then we have shallow mining, which is workings whose depth is 30 metres or less from the surface. And this, obviously, as you can imagine, leaves us with that awkward bit in the middle, where workings are between 30 metres and 150 metres. Again, as a rule of thumb, some consider these as moderate depth workings or deep for the purposes of the Con29M queries. Another form of mining is retreat mining. This is the removal of pillars in the underground mining technique known as room and pillar mining. A former metal mine in Cornwall, the one I mentioned earlier, Geaver, they bought this mine in Durham at a time when the metal mines were closing. Unfortunately, rather than making good money from the extraction of coal, they discovered that much of the coal was left in the form of pillars left behind, which is very difficult to excavate, very dangerous, and they didn't actually make any money on the coal there. So in summary, we've considered a number of ways in which the coal has been extracted. We have heard about the size, shape and depth of the techniques. The information assists with an understanding of the risks that these excavations pose in the Con29M questions relating to mine entries and to shallow mining. And now we'll just try and understand where the deposits in the UK lie, as we mentioned earlier. We've had a look at what sort of mining has taken place, but what about the history of coal mining in the UK? So the earliest evidence of coal extraction dates to the Neolithic, some 12,000 years ago. Sea coal washed up on the shores of Northumberland and Scotland is recorded as being used in the 13th century, and it was actually banned in London because of pollution levels. So it gives you an idea that even back then, there was some sort of environmental thinking going on behind any sort of extraction and burning of fossil fuels. In 1575, the first coal mine was sunk under the Firth of Forth. By 1700, British coal output stood at about 3 million tonnes, increasing to meet demands for fuel to power steam engines. By 1800, demand was rising and wooden props were used to support underground tunnels all over the UK. Sir Humphrey Davy invented the miner's safety lamp in 1815, which significantly reduced the numbers of underground explosions and gassings due to the buildup of bad air, also known as black damp or choke damp. You will be familiar with a question in the Con29M reports, which raises the question if the property is affected by mine gas. The majority of coal was extracted from the Industrial Revolution onwards. Peak coal production hit in 1913. 287 million tonnes were produced. In 1926, the general strike in the United Kingdom lasted 9 days. And then the Coal Industry Nationalisation Act of 1946 established the National Coal Board, which acted as the managing authority for coal mining activities. This was created due to the government needing to tackle what they called idleness after the Second World War. At Clifton Colliery in Greater Manchester in 1947, the unveiling of a sign marked the nationalisation of the coal industry. The miners' strike of 1984-85 was a major industrial action to shut down the British coal industry in an attempt to prevent colliery closures. It was led by Arthur Scargill of the National Union of Mine Workers. Violent confrontations between flying pickets and police characterised the year-long strike, which ended in a decisive victory for the Conservative government and allowed the closure of most of Britain's collieries. In 1987, the coal industry was partially privatised and the British Coal Corporation was established. The industry was fully privatised by 1994 when the Coal Authority was formed, and by 2001, the UK coal production was exceeded by imports, and then in 2015, the UK government pledged to phase out all coal-powered power stations by 2025. So latest government figures show that current stockpiles of coal in the UK are more than twice what the government anticipates coal-fired power stations will need, ahead of that 2025 deadline for ending coal-fired power for electricity. This slowdown in coal usage is increasing imports of coal. Exports of coal from the UK are at an 8-year high, increasing 28% in 2018 and sourced from the UK's open cast coal mines. However, a new deep coal mine was granted approval in 2019. Since 2014, West Cumbria Mining has been developing plans for the creation of an underground metallurgical coal mine off the coast near Whitehaven in West Cumbria to supply the UK and European steelmaking industry, which in 2019 imported 52 million tonnes of seaborne metallurgical coal from America, Australia, Russia and Colombia. Formal planning approval for the development of the Cumbrian Metallurgical Coal Project to be known as Woodhouse Colliery, which is a bit more catchy, was unanimously granted subject to 99 planning conditions on the 19th of March last year by the Development Control Committee of Cumbria County Council at a meeting in Kendal. The decision was subsequently ratified again, a second unanimous vote on the 31st of October in 2019. This will be done using existing coal workings to extend and work deposits under the sea. This information will therefore be reflected in the Con29M questions relating to future coal mining. So now, having considered the where, the how and the when coal was mined in the UK, we will now consider how the mine searches themselves came about. So in 1947, the National Coal Board would respond to specific enquiries on a one-to-one basis. No standardisation or formalised responses were given. From 1985, there was a computerised system put in place to help respond to these queries in a more modern way. This involved a team of archivists working tirelessly to collate all the coal mining data available for each property request. This was still a task requiring manual intervention and time to assess the potential risk to a property. Moving on again, all of the plans held by the Coal Authority, about 120,000, had to be digitised and the data extracted from them. This process took a large number of mine surveyors to complete over a number of years. This forms the Coal Authority digital mining dataset, which was made available to industry professionals on a licence basis. It introduced more choice and competition to the market, as well as providing an opening for innovative new products that are on offer today. In 2016, the Coal Authority granted Mining Searches UK one of the first commercial licenses to use the data. So prior to the 19th century, coal mining remained largely unrecorded. In 1840, the first MRO was established in London. It wasn't until 1872 that the Coal Mines Regulation Act came into action, making it a legal requirement to deposit an abandonment plan within 3 months from the date of abandonment. It was a requirement to produce a plan from 1850, but no requirement to deposit. The key point to note here was that all that was required to be shown on these plans was the boundary of the mine workings up to the time of abandonment. There was no requirement for orientation with the surface, the depth or section information to be shown. Abandonment plans were used to help ensure safety of miners, and then in around 1883 the MRO was transferred to the Home Office, no doubt along with the collection of the plans. In 1923 to 1931, there were 2 mining accidents, following which there was a call for plans to be deposited and which were widely responded to. This was significant as it now included plans which identified the underground workings. In 1939, all the plans were transferred to Buxton from London. After the Second World War in 1950, coal plans were then segregated from plans of other minerals and split into regional areas to allow the plans to be more easily accessible. The collections of coal plans were reunited in 1992 to British Coal site near Burton-on-Trent and were then inherited by the Coal Authority on privatisation of the coal industry in 1994 to be finally transferred to the Coal Authority headquarters in Mansfield. The reason we've chosen to provide this potted history of the plans is simply this. Plans were never produced. They weren't deposited. They were lost in transit or have become unreadable. They've been torn, written all over, tea spilt on them, you name it. This tells us that the records we consider are incomplete. The reasons why the plans were produced is not necessarily clear on the plans deposited. For example, plans can show exaggerated reserves drawn to raise interest in selling shares. The plans may only show a fraction of the mine's extent, identifying only those areas which the mine was looking to exploit. All this provides the reason that you should have an experienced, competent coal mining assessment undertaken. It is integral to the rationale of the provision of the Con29M that we see today. Shafts are a near vertical excavation onto a mineral deposit or ore body. Once abandoned, they are usually backfilled with timbers, colliery spoil or organic matter, and over time these can decay, leaving voids within the fill. Eventually, these voids can lead to the collapse of a feature-affecting surface. The process of infilling a shaft partway up is sometimes known as sollering. Adits are horizontal tunnel-like features used for haulage, ventilation, access and water removal. Often the adit shafts become blocked near their outfall and would be rerouted. This leads to the sinking of numerous additional adit shafts. Recorded workings cover 20,000 square kilometres, the same as around 2 million rugby pictures of the UK. Shallow workings are those worked between the surface and 30-metre depths. Where past underground has been identified, there are no further searches to be carried out. It should be noted that in the event of coal mining settlement or subsidence occurring, the property will benefit from the protection of the Coal Mining Subsidence Act of 1991 and as amended in 1994. You may also wish to carry out a visual inspection of the property by a suitably qualified and experienced person. This may be of the value in identifying any currently unidentifying mining-related settlement or subsidence effects. So possible coal workings are indicated by recorded coal crops. The coal seam comes to the surface. They're very easy to work and easy to win the coal. These early workings are usually unrecorded and of a primitive style, meaning they can be very unstable. The same principle applies in metalliferous mining and outcrops of stone, for example, on the Lizard down in Cornwall. So the Groundsure Con29M provides information on any damage notice or subsidence claim for the property or within 50 metres of the property since the 31st of October 1994 in a table that you can see in the report. It will give information on remedial obligation and any stop notices delaying the start of remedial works or repairs to the property. Where a record of a coal mining subsidence claim has been identified within the property boundary or immediately abutting the property, the details relating to the claim are included in our Con29M. We recommend that a subsidence claims history report is obtained by the Coal Authority with a view to clarifying any associated risk. Where the subsidence claim has been identified within 50 metres of the property, whilst no further searches are required, it should be noted that in the event of a coal mining settlement or subsidence occurring, the property will benefit from the protection of the Coal Mining Subsidence Act of 1991 and, as again mentioned, the amended version in 1994. So I've now guided you through 360 million years of time where mining activity sped up in the last 200 years. We've considered the history of coal mining, the history of the site plan, as well as where these workings lie. We've heard how the types of mining reflect the depth and the age of the workings, and therefore the risk posed to the property. All of this information feeds into our Con29M report, which I'll just give you a very brief look at now. So, as we've mentioned throughout, there's a standardised set of questions dictated by the Law Society, which must be answered. And this Groundsure official Con29M answers all 11 questions for residential and 14 for commercial that are set out in the Law Society guidance. As we at Groundsure hold the licence for Cheshire Brine, we've also included a unique Cheshire Brine alert on the front page, which will let you know if the property in question is impacted by the Cheshire Brine and therefore requires a separate search. Each report comes with a £100,000 insurance policy from Zurich, and as of March 2020, we've also included the mine entry assessment as standard. Historically, if a mine entry was found within 20 metres of the property, you would have to purchase a separate mine entry interpretive report. With our updated version, if we found an entry, then we include that within the Con29M for no extra charge and no separate disbursement fee. So, for those of you who use the Groundsure products, you'll be familiar with the design and format of our reports. You get everything you need at a glance on the front page with a map and outline of the property on the top right, the overall assessment and professional opinion on the top left, And then the overview of findings to all 11 or 14 questions on the top, on the right on the front page, in an easy to read colour-coded format. The Cheshire Brine Alert is also included on the front page, as you can see. And then just under the professional opinion, you can see that little blue strip that tells you that the mine entry interpretive report is also included. We wanted to show you the possible outcomes you may receive as a result of what's being flagged. Mining Search UK have done a lot of work actually calculating what we call the zone of influence for every mine entry, and we report on both the mine entries and the zone of influence in all reports where required. In some instances, a mine entry may fall outside of the 20-metre search radius, but the zone of influence may impact the property. So we've reported on all of these, and I'll show you this in a second. We don't include a completely past report, which obviously you might get from time to time as well. So not many properties will actually have a mine entry near it. But as I said, our colleagues at Mining Search UK have done an incredible amount of work by calculating the zones of influence for each mine entry on record. This slide shows the various rules for the zone of influence. So basically, the zone that could be affected by a mine collapse. The small orange dot depicts the mine entry, and then the orange circle showing that zone of influence calculation. This calculation isn't simple or binary, in that it's not just about how far away a mine entry is from a property, i.e. 20 metres. Each zone of influence for each mine entry is different and therefore poses a unique risk to each property. They take a lot of different factors into account, like the dimensions and the depth of the working, the distance from the property, and whether or not it has been reportedly, if it's reportedly been secured in the past, if so, how and what width. Mining Search UK can calculate if it were to collapse and the extent of the surface that would be affected. This means in some cases mine entries within 20 metres of a property may be an acceptable risk, and on the other side, mine entries outside of the standard 20-metre buffer may pose a risk. We believe this is a more intelligent and accurate model which our colleagues at Mining Search UK have painstakingly put together and calculated. So using the screen as an example, number one, you've got the mine entry within 20 metres, but the zone of influence doesn't encroach onto the property boundary. So this would be okay and no further action needs to be taken. Number two, the mine entry is within 20 metres and the zone of influence encroaches onto the property boundary. So this isn't ideal and further action may be needed. Number three, the mine entry is outside 20 metres, but the zone of influence encroaches onto the property boundary. Again, further action would be needed for this. Number four is the ideal situation where everything is outside of that boundary, so there's no action needed there. And then number five is obviously doomsday, the worst case scenario, and yes, you'd need to get some further information on that. And that's everything from me today. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and I'm going to turn my fan back on now. So thank you.
Thanks for your time today, Andy, and we hope that those of you that joined us found today's session informative. The report that you've seen today is available on the InfoTrack system, and you can get in touch with your account manager if you have any questions. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you to another webinar soon.